Hello and welcome to Business 7. We have a jam-packed program for you with news full of economic, financial and business developments in Africa. Stay tuned.
Connection. It's in the human touch, the feeling of belonging. It inspires us and empowers us, creates clarity from complexity. It starts new conversations, unlocks the power of advice, and makes an impact on your life. At Alex Forbes, we pioneer insight to provide you with advice that connects your decisions of today to your impact tomorrow.
To kick off our program, let's take a quick look at the most important business stories in Africa for the past week.
Here are 5 business stories making headlines in sub-Saharan Africa this week. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen starts a 3-country trip to Africa on Friday. After decades in which China has dominated investment on the continent, the US is pitching itself as a more sustainable alternative. Yellen's visit takes in Senegal, Zambia and South Africa. Democratic Republic of Congo expects to reach an agreement on overhauling $6 billion of an infrastructure for minerals deal with Chinese investors this year, its finance minister has said. President Felix Tshisekedi's government has been revisiting a 2007 deal struck under his predecessor, Joseph Kabila. South Africa is developing new legislation to speed up energy projects, a presentation by the country's Energy Crisis Committee has shown. Amid some of the country's worst ever power cuts, the committee said emergency legislation could add capacity more quickly. Several other African countries will also be adding more capacity, via United Arab Emirates renewables company Masdar. On Friday, it said it had agreed generation projects with a capacity of up to 3 gigawatts in Angola and Uganda. Earlier in the week, 2 gigawatts of projects were announced in Zambia and a 500-megawatt solar plant in Ethiopia. And finally, Zambia received a debt-for-nature swap proposal from the WWF as a part of its $13 billion restructuring discussions, the government confirmed on Wednesday. In its simplest form, that means replacing expensive bonds or loans with cheaper financing in exchange for protecting fragile ecosystems. The approach helped both Belize and Seychelles secure write-downs that put tens of millions of dollars into ocean protection. Conservationists see Zambia, with its vast national parks, as an obvious candidate.
Nigeria on Monday celebrated the opening of a brand new multi-billion-dollar port financed by China. Reuters filed this report.
Nigeria opened a $1 billion Chinese-built port in Lagos on Monday. The Lekki deep-sea port is expected to ease congestion elsewhere and help Nigeria become an African hub for transshipment, the handling of cargoes in transit for other destinations.
This project could create at least 200,000 jobs. That just means income.
China's ambassador to Nigeria is Soi Jianchun.
Today really is a special day for China and Nigeria and China. And I think that it's very, very important. This is a transformative project, game-changer project, not only for the engine of the economy for Nigeria, for the West Africa.
China is among the largest bilateral lenders to Nigeria and has funded rail, roads and power stations. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has made building infrastructure a key pillar of his government's economic policy. He hopes it will help his ruling party win votes during next month's presidential election. The new port is 75% owned by the China Harbour Engineering Company and Singapore-based Tolaram Group, with the balance shared between the Lagos state government and the Nigerian Ports Authority.
South Africa's power problems seem to be endless, and the implications of power outages are tremendous. Reuters visited a poultry farmer and filed this report.
At his poultry farm in South Africa's Lichtenburg, Herman de Vries is checking on the chicks he has left. This week has seen his business devastated, he says, amid some of the worst power cuts on record. Tens of thousands of his chicks have died, and he says they are still losing birds every day.
I think we're going to end up around about between 40 and 50,000 that's going to die at the end. We already took out more than 50,000. It's a very, very sad day for me today on the farm.
South Africa's power crisis means most households and businesses are without electricity for at least 6 hours a day, and often as many as 10. Struggling state utility Eskom has implemented so-called Stage 6 power cuts, known locally as load shedding. The chick deaths have been caused by problems with air conditioning, de Vries says, adding that his issue started in mid-December when a faulty transformer prompted Eskom to connect the area to another line, causing voltage damage in his pumps and motors. In addition, he says he's spending about 14,000 rands a day, or over $800 US, running his farm with generators.
We can't farm on diesel. It's not consistent. It's impossible. Load shedding has an enormous amount of disruptions and negative effects on my whole operation. And it's not just me, it's our whole community. It's the whole farming community.
The South African Poultry Association says that if severe outages persist, more chickens will die, affecting supply. The industry, it warns, could be brought to its knees. Fast food outlets, including global franchises like KFC and Nando's, have announced temporary closures to some of their stores due to a supply crunch. Eskom said at the start of the week that it would begin shortening power cuts, but added that there remained a high degree of uncertainty.
Every day, you make choices that make you legendary. Journey together with us on the path to securing your legacy as a member of the League of Legends. With the Select Platinum Bundle Fee Premium Bank offering, you will access tools that will enable you to thrive. If you earn 850,000 Namibian dollars per annum or more, you can apply for this offering today via bankvinted.com.na for only 447 Namibian dollars per month. Bank Vinted, a member of Capricorn Group.
Africa's ability to produce vaccines at scale got a boost recently with the news that Senegal plans to invest $50 million over 10 years in this field. Here's Reuters.
Senegal's Institut Pasteur is to get $50 million over 10 years to help it expand Africa's ability to produce vaccines at scale. That investment is coming from the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness, or CEPI, which announced the deal on Thursday. CEPI, a global initiative headquartered in Norway, is creating a network of vaccine manufacturers in developing countries. Their aim is to boost capacity and reserves for future outbreaks and pandemics. The funds, which will initially include up to $15 million over 3 years, will support development of the Institute's manufacturing facilities for routine and outbreak vaccinations. Under the deal, some capacity will be reserved to produce vaccines for Global South countries. At the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic, Africa, like other poorer regions, was left without adequate vaccine supplies. That highlighted the need for the continent to develop its own production. Amadou Alpha Sall, CEO of the non-profit Institut Pasteur in Senegal's capital Dakar, said the funds will ensure regional outbreaks are not neglected by deploying the latest technology for the greatest need.
Namibia understands loyalty to its local beer brands, and the same in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Reuters recently visited a manufacturing plant which shows that despite terrible challenges in the country, this production facility goes on.
Two Ebola outbreaks and rebel violence haven't stopped the beer flowing in Democratic Republic of Congo. This is the Brisimba factory in Beni, located in North Kivu province. The impoverished region has been grappling with a major offensive by the M23 rebel group that is active in nearby forests. But despite the insecurity, bottles of beer continue to zip along conveyor belts and the company employs hundreds of workers. That's a big deal in a country where the World Bank says 73% of people live on less than $1.90 a day. Thomas Wiebor is a sales and marketing manager at Brisimba.
The Beni plant has become the hope of this bruised region, and many people have joined this project and find an extremely positive side to seeing an international group invest in this region.
The plant took on an initial $134 million investment and output tripled to 600,000 hectolitres between 2013 and 2021. Brisimba is controlled by Francis Castel Group and further expanded production in Beni last year with a second filling line. But there are major challenges for the company as workers sometimes have to go past rebel checkpoints to make deliveries along poorly kept roads.
We are unable to access certain areas. We have roads that are sometimes blocked by the poor state of the road infrastructure or by high insecurity, and it is true that this lengthens the supply time for the areas, sometimes even prevents them.
Back in Beni's bars, there is no beer shortage, and this local says it's a source of pride to drink beer made in the country.
Zimbabwe recently signed a bill outlawing organized protests by nurses. Reuters filed this report.
Strike action like this could now see health workers in Zimbabwe facing a fine or up to 6 months in jail. President Emmerson Mnangagwa signing a bill into law on Tuesday that outlaws organised protests by healthcare workers. The new legislation comes after a protracted battle over salaries. Thousands of doctors and nurses at state-run hospitals went on strike last year and indeed in previous years, demanding a hefty raise and wages in US dollars. That was due to a slide in the local currency and steep inflation that eroded the value of their earnings.
I cannot pay my rent, I cannot eat. So the situation is bad and our cause is justified.
Many nurses in Zimbabwe earn less than $100 a month. The southern African country has seen an exodus of nurses and doctors that has left hospitals understaffed. In November, Zimbabwe's Health Services Board said over 4,000 health workers had left the country since 2021.
Thank you so much to FNB for this opportunity. Thank you so much to FNB. What an experience. I never got to do shopping in 5 minutes, but look at all this.
The war in Ukraine has impacts globally, also in Africa and in Kenya, where the country's national airline is suffering due to the impact. Let's take a look at what Reuters did.
One of Africa's biggest airlines may be forced to cut some flights, its chief executive said late on Monday, due to impacts on its supply chain caused by the war in Ukraine. Kenya Airways CEO Alan Kilavuka said in a statement that the carrier had been experiencing flight disruptions. That's due to delays in securing aircraft components required for maintenance. According to Kilovuka, the Ukraine conflict has significantly crippled the Russian supply chain crucial to global aviation. He cited titanium from Russia as one of the key raw materials used by the aviation industry. Kenya Airways operates a fleet of Boeing and Embraer planes. Its strategy hinges on connecting African travellers to the world and vice versa through its Nairobi hub.
Staying with Kenya, now the country's president said that it will ramp up tax collection in the country and that the country will definitely not default on its debt.
Kenya will not default on its debt, its president has promised. In a wide-ranging interview with Kenyan media outlets on Wednesday, William Ruto also said the government plans to ramp up tax collection over the next 2 years. The East African country saw public debt surge during an infrastructure construction drive, including for roads and rail, under Ruto's predecessor Uhuru Kenyatta. Last year, ratings agency Fitch warned that government debt levels and global interest rates were increasing the threat of credit rating downgrades in as many as 10 African countries. Kenya was identified as one of those most at risk. Since Ruto's government took over in September, it has pledged to curb expensive commercial borrowing in favour of cheaper sources like the World Bank. We have applied the brakes on more borrowing, Ruto said on Wednesday. He added that the government aimed to collect an extra 1 trillion shillings, or $8.1 billion, in taxes over the next 2 years. The president also reiterated plans to cut 300 billion shillings, that's approaching $2.5 billion, in borrowing in the current fiscal year that runs until the end of June.
Ghana is pushing back against the global fashion industry. Let's take a look at this report from Reuters and find out how.
A second-hand pop-up in a courtyard of shipping containers in Ghana's capital, Accra. The Vintage Gala was founded by 23-year-old founders Prince Quist and James Eden Dodati, bringing together young vintage enthusiasts pushing back against the global fast fashion industry by encouraging their peers to shop second-hand.
Everything right now is just to inspire everybody to shop or thrift vintage. So we are not just saying second-hand goods are second-class stuffs. So we are just trying to inspire people that shopping vintage makes recycling better.
Receives around 15 million items of used clothing each week from Western countries and China. They are often offloaded in bulk, and according to the US-based Orr Foundation, around 40% of it ends up in massive urban landfills. Much of the clothing waste passes through Accra's Kantamanto, one of the largest garment markets on the continent, where bales of used clothes are sold based on the expected quality of garments. Quist and Dati would comb through rivers of imported clothes several times a week before sunrise, searching for gems they can resell on their Instagram pages.
It has been made back in the days, and you are not going to buy a new clothes, but you want to wear something that has been made previously. That way you are helping the environment by not using raw materials, using other things to reproduce.
Interest rates will remain a focus point in the global economic arena this year. But what is it? Let's just touch base and find out exactly what it is and how it works. The IMF filed this report.
Welcome back to the third episode of the Ask an Economist series. I'm Sendela from the IMF, and in this series, we tackle your questions about thorny economic issues, breaking them down and giving you straight answers without all that fancy academic speak. Let's get started. So over the past year, we've seen inflation pick up all over the world. And in response, many central banks have tried bringing inflation back down using a powerful tool called interest rates. Today, we're going to tackle questions around the theme of interest rates. So what are they? How do they impact the economy? And how do rising interest rates affect inflation? So, what are interest rates? Well, interest rates refer to the cost of borrowing money. And they show up everywhere. So whether I'm taking out a student loan or using my credit card for major purchases or applying for a mortgage loan to buy a house. And while there's many different types of interest rates, the most important tool to move interest rates is the interest rate set by a country's central bank. Economists call this the policy rate. And as its name suggests, you can think of a central bank as being the big bank of normal banks. A central bank's policy rate determines how much it costs banks to borrow money, which in turn determines what banks charge everyone else to borrow from them. So that brings us to our second question. How does the central bank's interest rate impact the economy? When policy rates are low, the cost of borrowing money is cheap for banks. So they charge households and companies and governments lower interest rates. Now this is going to have ripple effects throughout the entire economy. Lower interest rates mean a lower cost for borrowing loans or lower payments on existing loans like variable rate mortgages. This drives up spending, it drives up investment, it drives up demand, and as a result you get an increase in overall economic activity. Now sometimes the balance between the supply and demand of goods and services in an economy can go off track, like we've seen over the last year. Supply shortages of everything ranging from cars to semiconductors to delivery workers clashed with really high demand. And that meant there was too much demand chasing too little supply, and that drove up prices. Now, central banks can't do very much about there being too little supply in the short term, but by changing the policy rate, they can have a major impact on demand. So that brings us to our third question. How do rising interest rates affect inflation? The higher cost of borrowing lowers demand by discouraging people from taking out loans or spending on their credit cards. On the flip side, interest rates for saving accounts also increase, and so that makes saving more attractive. For businesses, lower consumer spending often means less profits, and they too are facing higher borrowing costs. So as a result, you might see them push off investment or have to cut production, and that can lead to higher unemployment. Higher interest rates can also affect government spending plans too, as their financing costs rise. And so altogether, all these different pieces lead to lower demand and they help reduce inflation. Now you might be wondering, if increasing interest rates to tackle inflation causes all of this economic pain, why would we do it? So in the face of rising inflation, higher interest rates are often a necessary pain. Inflation is the worst tax on the poor. And if it isn't dealt with quickly, it can lead to even higher costs of living that further increase hardship, hurt consumer confidence, and over time, decrease trust in policymakers' ability to bring inflation back down to manageable levels. Now, if policymakers do lose the trust of the public, households and businesses can start to assume that maybe prices will continue increasing at an elevated pace. And workers will demand higher wages to keep pace with that inflation. In turn, those higher wages can lead to more demand pressure and a further spiraling up of prices. The trick here is for central banks to find the Goldilocks level of interest rates, in between too low and too high, that brings inflation back under control without putting too much strain on an economy. So that's all we have time for today. Please continue to send your questions to askaneconomist@imf.org, and we'll see you next time.
That's it from Business 7 for this week. Thank you for joining. We'll see you again next week.